Okay, we're going to get started. We're going to cover chapter 3 today. Just wanted to make sure that you're all aware on Moodle. The recorded videos are on the first panel on the home page. So for the class you did not attend on Monday, that's where the lecture is on chapter 2. So today's lecture will be posted tonight, so you can review any of those lectures. It's important because chapter 2 quiz is due tonight. So I've got 4 people in the class that have opened it up so far. So make sure that you go ahead and look over the lecture for chapter 2 and then take the quiz. Any questions on that? Any difficulty logging into Moodle or getting access to those things? Has anybody watched a video online of a recorded lecture? Okay. Right, and then just to show you something on the quizzes, when you go to take the quiz, it is not a timed quiz. So if I wanted to take the quiz, I can go ahead, I can go look through the questions, I can hop around, open the book, look for answers. I can go back to the course and it will remember any answers that I saved. You can go back and forth on it. You don't have to complete it all at one sitting. Just make sure that you do submit it before it's due. Okay, any questions on that? All righty. So today is chapter 3. We're going to be talking about the safe food handler. Okay, so we're going to talk about all the different ways that people that handle food can contaminate the food and make people sick. So if you're working in a restaurant and you are sick yourself, that's one way to make people sick. If you have any type of a wound or a boil that contains a pathogen, that can make people sick. If you sneeze or cough in the kitchen and your liquid particles come out of your mouth and your nose, land on the food. Even if you have contact with a person who is sick, so if you're living at home with somebody that has symptoms of a virus or one of the bacteria, you could be carrying that. If you use the restroom and don't wash your hands. If you have the classic symptoms of diarrhea or vomiting or jaundice, which jaundice again is a yellowing of the eyes or the skin. Okay, things that food handlers can do, actions that you do, touching your face, your nose, your hair, any part of your skin, because there's a bacteria called Staphylococcus that is on the skin of 25 to 35% of healthy people. So it's just there. And if you're touching, I have to wear a hat in the kitchen so I don't touch my head and bring bacteria onto the food. So any type of touching of the body, you need to wash your hands. If you're wiping or touching your nose, rubbing your ear, touching a pimple or an infected wound or boil, wearing and touching a dirty uniform. So this person in the photograph here is doing all of these things. Coughing or sneezing into the hand. Typically what you do in a kitchen is sneeze into your elbow if you're wearing a longer jacket. Spitting in the operation. So one of the things that a chef has to do is taste their food before you send it out. So you're going to be tasting some things. If you taste something that's bad, you can't spit into the kitchen or spit into the trash container because again, those particles can go throughout the operation. So every restaurant kitchen should have a personal hygiene program. So you want to create your hygiene policies for your restaurant. You want to train everybody that works for you on personal hygiene policies, and then retrain them regularly. Model correct behavior at all times. Supervising food safety practices. So you want to make sure that you keep an eye out on what people are doing in your kitchen. Revising personal hygiene policies when laws or science change. So clearly we're in a semester where things have changed. Y'all are wearing masks and I'm wearing a face shield, okay? Because we're all trying to protect each other against the COVID. And things happen. So it's a good example of when things change. A year ago, nobody would have ever imagined we'd be doing things the way we are. Where do we wash our hands? We have sinks in the kitchen that are designated hand sinks. There are pot sinks in the kitchen, and there are sinks that we prep food in the kitchen, and then we have separate sinks for hand washing. So that's the only place that you wash your hands is at a hand washing sink. You don't ever use sinks that are designated for the food prep or for washing dishes. It's very tempting to go into a big bay of hot soapy water, put your hands in there and wash them, but that's not what we do. We go to a hand sink to take care of that. Okay, so the hand washing procedure. You're gonna have to memorize the way that this is written because this is how it would be on the test. So the first step is wetting your hands and arms. You're using running warm water, and warm water is just so that it feels warm to you. It doesn't have to be hot. The whole process should take at least 20 seconds. After your hands are wet, apply soap enough to build up a good lather. The next part, step 3, scrub hands, arms vigorously for 10 to 15 seconds, cleaning your fingertips, under the fingernails, and between the fingers. So at least 10 to 15 seconds of scrubbing. And you want to make sure you get the whole way around your wrists, both wrists, front and back of the hands, in between the fingers, and under the fingernails. Rinse your hands under running warm water. So if you would go to a pot sink and you wash your hands in the dishwater, there is a rinse sink that has water in it, but it's not running water. So that's another reason why you don't go to the pot sink to wash your hands. And then the last step is dry your hands and arms using a single-use paper towel or like an air dryer. It can either be blowing high-speed cold air or hot air. So you have to remember both of the times. The whole process takes at least 20 seconds, and then the scrubbing the hands parts takes 10 to 15 seconds. Okay, you want to avoid contaminating your hands. If you're using the restroom, consider using a paper towel to shut off the faucet and open the door. It's not impossible to do in the restrooms that we have here to grab the door handle with the paper towel that you use to dry your hands and toss it back into the garbage can, or you can bring it into a lecture room and put it in the trash here. When do we wash our hands? There's a lot of times when we're going to have to wash our hands. Food handlers have to wash their hands before these items, before you start preparing food. So it's an automatic. Anytime a chef walks into a kitchen, they wash their hands. First thing. Anytime you're working with clean equipment and utensils. And anytime you put on single-use gloves. So we use gloves to prevent bare hand contact with ready-to-eat food, but we also use them a lot of other times. And when we talk more about gloves, we'll go into that. Also, so now after you use the restroom or touch your body for clothing, you've got to wash your hands. So you've got to train yourself not to do things like touch yourself, rub your arms, that kind of thing. And it takes a lot of concentration and focus to do that. Plus, while you're here at school, you're learning how to cook. So you're going to be really focused on the technique, but you still have to remember the sanitation. Anytime a food handler coughs, sneezes, blows their nose, or use a handkerchief or tissue, you got to wash your hands after that. Anytime you eat anything, drink, smoke, chew gum, or tobacco, you got to wash your hands. Anytime you're handling soiled items, so you might be taking out the trash, you might have dirty towels that you're lifting up and taking out of the kitchen. You got to make sure that you wash your hands before you start working with food again. Anytime after you have handled raw meat, seafood, or poultry, because those items are going to be more likely to have bacteria on them. So you need to have your hands washed. And then taking out the garbage. Okay. Also, you have to wash your hands after handling service animals or aquatic animals. So does anybody know what a service animal is? Like a seeing eye dog, or somebody has a companion dog. You don't often see them in restaurants, but if you do come in contact with one of those animals and you're petting it, then you got to go wash your hands before you work with food. Aquatic animals would be like if you had a tank of live lobster and you're going in and you're handling that, you got to wash your hands. After you handle any type of chemicals that might affect food safety, so any of the cleaning supplies that you have to wash your hands after using those. Anytime you change a task, so if you're washing something like lettuce, you would want to wash your hands before you start working with another food item. Anytime you leave the kitchen area, the preparation area, and you return. So if you have to go out, take a phone call, go out and talk to somebody, any reason that you leave that room, when you come back into the kitchen, you've got to wash your hands. Anytime you handle money, you've got to wash your hands. Using electronic devices, so cell phones, the number one item that people use every day. If you use it in the kitchen, you're going to have to wash your hands before you work with food. There's more bacteria on your cell phone than there is on the average toilet seat. Anybody clean their cell phone like every day? Okay, the toilet seats get cleaned probably close to every day. Then anything, the coverall, touching anything that might contaminate your hands. Okay, so what do we do? If somebody has touched food or food contact surfaces with unclean hands, you dispose of the contaminated food. Okay, so that can be really costly for a restaurant to have to throw away any amount of food. It's hard enough to make money in a restaurant, and you'd never want to waste your ingredients. So this would be a really careless way to be wasting food. Clean potentially contaminated equipment and utensils. Okay, so if there was a spill in the kitchen of gumbo, let's say, you've got to make sure you clean up all of the areas that were affected by that. So anything that was even close to it that might have splashes of the gumbo on it, you'd have to make sure it got cleaned up. Retrain or coach food handlers who are not following proper hand washing procedures if necessary. It would be like me saying every 5 minutes in class, make sure your mask covers your nose while you're in presence of anybody. Hand antiseptics, we're seeing those a lot now. These are liquids or gels used to lower the number of pathogens on the skin. Okay, so you have like a wipe on the on your table here. You have the option of using it or not at the table. It lowers the number of pathogens on a surface. It doesn't kill 100% of everything. If you use hand antiseptics, they have to comply with the Code of Federal Regulations and the Food and Drug Administration standards. In a kitchen, they're only used after you wash your hands. They're never used in place of washing your hands. And then whatever that liquid is, it should be allowed to dry before you touch food or equipment. Hand care. You want to keep your fingernails short and clean. We've got two things here. Do not wear false nails or wear nail polish. There's an asterisk beside that because technically the health department will let you do that as long as you are always wearing gloves when you're in the kitchen. Individual places will have their own policies, like at the school. If you have nails like the person in the center, wearing gloves is going to be really difficult because you're going to tear through them really quickly. So when you're working in a kitchen, you want to have short, clean fingernails. Infected wounds or cuts, they're very likely to contain pus. They have to be covered if the wound is opened or draining. How it's covered depends on where it's located. If it's on your hand or wrist, you want to have a bandage over the cut, or there's something called a finger cut. You can see in the picture here, it's like a little blue, almost like a little balloon that fits over the top part of the finger. And then you have to put a glove over top of that. So there's no way that any of the pathogens from that wound are going to get in touch with the food you're working with. If it's something on your arm, you want to make sure you have a good bandage on it. Other parts of the body, cover them with a dry, tight-fitting bandage. Okay. Single-use gloves. Okay, we have, this is to prevent bare hand contact with ready-to-eat foods. Okay. You don't use these in place of hand washing. The actual technique is you wash your hands, you put on a pair of gloves. When you need to change gloves, you take them off, you wash your hands and put on another pair of gloves. They should be used when you're handling ready-to-eat food, except when washing produce. So if you're washing lettuce in a sink, you can fill up a sink full of cold water and wash the lettuce in there. You don't necessarily have to have gloves on when you do that. Also, when you're handling ready-to-eat ingredients for a dish that will be cooked to the correct internal temperature. So if you're chopping onions to put into your gumbo, those are going to get cooked to a very high temperature. So you don't have to worry about wearing the gloves when you're handling that type of food. Which kind of gloves do we buy? They have to be approved for food service. They have to be disposable, one-time use. You want to have sizes because everybody's hands are different sizes. We go from small to extra large here. That pretty much covers everybody. And you want to have alternatives to latex because a certain percentage of people are allergic to latex, so you need to have an alternative. How do we use them? I said a minute ago, you wash your hands before you put on the gloves. And you do that whenever you start a new task. You get the correct glove size. You hold the gloves by the edge of the glove or the part that comes down to your wrist. When you put them on, once they are on, check them for any type of rips or tears. Just replace it if you have to. Never blow into the gloves, okay, because the pathogens from your mouth can be going onto the gloves. Never roll the gloves to make them easier to put on. If you're thinking of them like a balloon that's difficult to blow up and they're going to be tight, some people might be inclined to roll them up. That just weakens the glove and potentially puts pathogens on it. And we never wash and reuse gloves. So if you touch something with your gloves on that would contaminate food, you take the gloves off, throw them away, and put on another pair after you wash your hands. You don't go and wash your hands with gloves on them. When do we change them? As soon as they become dirty or torn. Also, before beginning any different task. So when you're switching from one task to another, you don't want to carry pathogens with you. After an interruption, such as taking a phone call. After any time, after you handle raw meat, seafood, or poultry, and before handling ready-to-eat food. After 4 hours of continuous use. So has anybody ever worn these latex gloves? You have? Okay. Have you worn a pair for 4 hours? It's really difficult to wear the same pair of gloves for 4 hours. It's conceivable that you might have a job where you like hand make hamburger patties and that's all you do all day long. And if that's the case and you can wear the gloves for 4 straight hours, then you got to stop, wash your hands, and put on a new pair of gloves. Okay, bare hand contact with ready-to-eat food. Never handle ready-to-eat food with bare hands when you primarily serve a high-risk population. Okay, so anybody remember what our high-risk populations are? Elderly, preschool, transplant recipients, people with compromised immune systems, that type of thing. I spent about an hour last night reading about what is elderly. So what is your definition of elderly? What's the age? What number is elderly? 45? 70? I'm liking that one better. 65? 65 seems to be the acceptable answer in this country right now as far as medical conditions are concerned. It's fascinating information how things have changed over time. Like the lifespan of a person is so much longer now than it used to be. But typically the age at which people would retire, so it could be 60, 65, 70. I know based on the year that I was born, I have to be 67 to get full Social Security benefits when I retire. So that is moving up. Okay, so when you see the 55-year-old grandmother on the quiz, if you've seen that one already, that's really not elderly. It doesn't matter if you're a grandparent or not. Okay, so when you're working for high-risk populations, avoid bare hand contact with ready-to-eat food unless it's in a dish that does not contain raw meat, seafood, or poultry, and the dish is going to be cooked to at least 145 degrees. Okay. If it is in a dish that contains raw meat, seafood, or poultry and is cooked to the correct temperature, which is typically above 145 degrees. Okay, personal hygiene practices. If you're working in a restaurant and you come in contact with the guests and they see you're in a dirty uniform, it's like, I would find that offensive. Like, that tells everybody so much about the way that you're working, and it tells me I don't want to come back. But it's also unsafe. Keeping food safe means paying attention to personal hygiene, so clean uniform every day. The entire staff needs to know the basics. So they want to take a shower before coming to work, be clean and ready to work with food, having nails neatly trimmed. So yeah, the basics of hygiene, you want to make sure that you're covered on that. Okay, hair restraints. This is kind of an extreme picture here, but you do want to make sure that your hair is covered with some type of a restraint. We have the skull caps here that we use. For people that have longer hair, they might have to wear like one of the bands that pulls your hair up and that you can put under the skull cap. Don't wear hair accessories that could become physical contaminants. So like something that would fall easily out of your hair and into food. Don't wear false eyelashes. You have a beard, especially to the extent that this guy does, wear a restraint to cover facial hair. Years ago, I used to keep a really short goatee type thing. And the only time I needed to wear a beard restraint was going into a manufacturing facility, because they're very, very particular about how things are done there. But in most restaurant kitchens, a short beard was totally acceptable. Okay, so food handlers have to wear clean clothing. It's got to be cleaned every day. Change uniforms, including your aprons, whenever they become soiled. So if you spill something on yourself, you can't just work through the shift. You've got to go get a uniform change. It's best to change into your work clothes at work instead of traveling in public in them and coming in contact with other people. Your street clothing and personal belongings should be stored in designated areas. The places that I worked had changing rooms, and you had lockers or some other way, you had lockers to keep your personal equipment in there. We've got lockers in the hallway here, so students here can put their regular clothes in. We've got changing rooms that are just about a third of the way down the hall here. Keep dirty clothing away from food and prep areas. So, like in these places that had changing rooms, obviously the changing rooms were quite a distance from the area where you actually worked with the food. And then at the end of the shift, you just threw your clothes into your uniform into the bin, and they had a laundry service for us. Food handlers must handle aprons correctly. Remove the aprons when you leave prep areas or when you leave the kitchen. Okay, never wipe your hands on your apron. Okay. Food handlers must not wear jewelry. So you want to keep that off of hands and arms anytime you're working with prepping food. No rings except if you have a plain band ring. That's the only type of jewelry that the health department will let you wear. Any type of bracelet, no matter what it is, even if it's a medical bracelet, you cannot wear it while you're working prepping food. Watches, can't wear them on your wrist. Remove other jewelry as required by your company. Could be earrings, necklaces, facial jewelry. So typically what we have at the school here is it's like no visible piercings, no type of earrings, nothing on your hands or wrists unless you have a plain band ring. Eating, drinking, smoking, chewing gum, or tobacco are only done in designated areas. So typically there would be like a break room where people can go eat lunch. Most places don't let you have any type of tobacco anymore. Food handlers never can eat, drink, smoke, chew gum, or tobacco whenever they're prepping or serving food, whenever they're working in a food prep area, whenever they're working in areas used to clean utensils and equipment, so like the pot washing sink. And I can tell you a funny story. My internship job, the guy that washed dishes had a pitcher of beer and an unlit cigar in his mouth the whole time that he was washing dishes there. But this is wrong, but I wasn't in a position to correct anybody. Exception for drinking: you can drink from a correctly covered container if you're careful to prevent contamination of the hands. So correctly covered container has a lid, a straw, or a sip lip top, something where your hands are not going to come in contact to what your mouth is touching. Okay, policies for reporting health issues. It's going to be very important. Tell your staff they need to let you know when they are sick. Be prepared to show proof that you have done this. Have them sign a document that says, I will tell you when I have symptoms of foodborne illness. Documentation showing staff have completed training, which includes information on the importance of reporting illness. When you have your ServSafe certificate, that's saying that you know what illnesses that you need to report. Posted signs or pocket cards that remind staff to notify managers when they are sick. That's also a good idea. Okay, so when they must report illness. If you're sick before you come to work, then you report it before you come to work. Or if you get sick while you are working, you need to report it. If the employer or somebody they live with has been diagnosed with an illness from one of our big 6 pathogens, and those are the 2 viruses, norovirus and hepatitis A, and then the 4 bacteria, which are Shigella, E. coli, and the 2 types of salmonella. And that should have been in the chapter 2 information. Okay, when food handlers are sick, you may need to restrict them from working with exposed food, utensils, and equipment. So there might be another job that they could do in your restaurant that doesn't involve handling food or equipment. But if they have any of these symptoms, vomiting, diarrhea, jaundice, a sore throat with fever, they have to be excluded from the operation. They shouldn't be coming into the operation. And then if they have an uncovered wound that is opened, you can't let them in unless they get it taken care of. Okay, so watch your staff for signs of illness, vomiting, and excessive trips to the restroom. Yellowing of the skin, eyes, and fingernails, indicating they might have hepatitis A. Cold sweats or chills that could indicate a fever. Persistent nasal discharge and sneezing. Okay, so this is an if-then kind of a thing. The food handler has an infected wound or boil that is not properly covered, then they can work somewhere else in the operation, but not with food utensils or any of the equipment. Food handler has a sore throat with a fever. Okay, you can also, they can work in your operation as long as they're not handling food utensils or equipment. However, if you're working in a nursing home or a hospital or a daycare center, that person can't come into the building because you're working with a population that is more sensitive to foodborne illness, so they can't come into the operation. In either case, whenever they have a sore throat and fever, before they can work with food, equipment, utensils again, they have to have a note from their doctor. Persistent sneezing, coughing, runny nose with discharges from the eyes, nose, or mouth. Keep them away from food, utensils, and equipment. Again, if they have any of these vomiting, diarrhea, or jaundice, keep them out of the operation. If they have vomiting and diarrhea, before they come to work, they have to be symptom-free for at least 24 hours, or a written release from their medical practitioner. We talked about jaundice before. Somebody has the yellowing skin, eyes, fingernails. That's a sign that they could have hepatitis A. They cannot work in your operation until they've been diagnosed. If there are other causes of jaundice, you have to report them to the health department, and before they come back to work, they have to be cleared by both their doctor and the health department. If a food handler is vomiting or has diarrhea and is diagnosed with one of the big 6 pathogens, those 4 bacteria and 2 viruses, again, they have to be excluded from the operation. They have to be reported to the health department, and then work with both the doctor and the health department before they can come back to work. Okay, that is chapter 3. Any questions on anything we've covered so far? Okay, so quiz 2 is due when? Tonight. Okay. Quiz 1 was due a couple of days ago. If you haven't done it, email me, and I can extend that for you. Okay, thank you and have a good day.